Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Robert.
And I'm Linda.
And we are ready to dive deep into a pretty complex topic today.
Yeah. U.S. support for Ukraine.
Specifically, how that landscape is shifting.
Particularly in the House.
Yeah. And it's not just some, theoretical political debate. This has real-world consequences for what's happening in Ukraine and what could happen.
Absolutely. And what could happen with U.S. foreign policy more broadly.
Yeah.
Our sources are painting a pretty stark picture here.
Yeah.
Waning support.
Yeah, among the general public and
that is
politicians.
The Congress.
Yeah, among powerful figures.
And this has become even more evident since the Republicans took control of the House.
Right, in November.
In the November election.
Yeah, so the changes in these committees, Foreign Affairs, Intelligence, and Armed Services.
Yeah, before the election, all three were chaired by Republicans who were in support of aid to Ukraine. Now only the Armed Services Committee is.
Right, so those committees are obviously very influential in shaping U.S. foreign policy, and that shift is causing some concern for those who believe that continued U.S. support for Ukraine is vital.
Rep. Jason Crow, a Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, said that the House Republican Conference has undergone a very rapid change.
He said very rapid change.
Yeah, he said it's shifted from traditional Reagan Republicans to something different.
Isolationists.
Isolation policies, he said.
Yeah, so pretty strong statement.
It is.
Highlighting the degree to which the Republican stance on this international engagement is changing.
Yeah, and to illustrate this change, I think we have to look at Rep. Rick Crawford, who's the new chair of the House Intelligence Committee.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. So Crawford, he voted against the latest supplemental aid package to Ukraine back in April of 24.
And he wasn't alone.
Right.
Other new members of key committees like Rep. Greg Stube and Rep. Eli Crane also voted against it. And this signals a change in direction for these committees.
A potential change in direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Crawford explained his vote. He didn't talk about the complexities of the war or, foreign policy, but instead cited concerns about the U.S. southern border and economic struggles faced by Americans.
Yeah, suggesting that for some lawmakers, domestic issues are taking priority over foreign policy commitments.
Even in a situation like this.
Even in a situation as critical as this war.
So where does this leave the U.S. in terms of its support for Ukraine? I mean, It's a very complex situation, right?
Yeah, definitely a more complex situation and a less unified front than we've seen before.
Right.
And with Republicans now controlling the House, securing significant future aid packages for Ukraine is going to be a lot harder.
Yeah, and let's not forget about Trump.
Oh, yeah.
He wants to see the war end ASAP, and he's been critical of Biden's approach, particularly the decision to allow Ukraine to use U.S.-provided weapons to hit targets deeper inside Russia.
And Trump's preferred Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has also hinted that both sides need to be ready to make concessions.
So how will all these perspectives play out within the Republican Party? Will we see a clash between those who support continued aid to Ukraine and those who believe it's time for a different approach?
Well, and that brings us to Crawford's call for diplomacy.
Right.
He's been emphasizing the need to find a way to bring the war to an end, echoing Biden's own sentiments that the killing needs to stop.
But how we get there, what role the U.S. should play, that's really where the debate is.
Right. And what's really interesting about Crawford's perspective is that he believes that neither Russia nor Ukraine is likely to achieve a complete victory.
He sees a stalemate.
Stalemate, most likely outcome.
And he used a very striking phrase.
He did.
Saying that Ukraine is running out of Ukrainians.
It's a grim reminder of the toll of this war.
And that makes it even more urgent to find a path to peace. But there are many different ideas about what that path should look like and what the U.S. role should be. Going through these sources, what really strikes me is how intertwined U.S. politics are with what's happening in Ukraine.
Right. It's like this tug of war between domestic priorities and these international commitments.
Yeah. Yeah. And Crawford even talks about this. He says both Russia and Ukraine need leverage in peace negotiations.
Right. They need some kind of advantage.
Yeah.
To come to the table.
To give them a reason to make concessions.
Yeah. But finding that balance is really, really hard.
Right. Because, if we give too much support to Ukraine, we risk escalating the conflict. But if we don't provide enough, then Ukraine might be forced into concessions that really aren't in their best interests.
Exactly. And this whole conversation about leverage and negotiations, it highlights how complex this is.
It is.
It's not about military victories. It's about diplomacy and power dynamics and economic considerations. It's about everything.
Yeah. And we also can't forget, Crawford's point about the human cost of this war.
Ukraine running out of Ukrainians.
Yeah. So how long can the Ukrainian people really sustain this level of sacrifice.
Especially with no end in sight.
Yeah, it's becoming increasingly clear that U.S. politics, is having a direct impact on what's happening over there, with fewer Republicans in Congress supporting aid to Ukraine. The pressure is mounting on the Biden administration to explore other options.
Like maybe more active diplomacy?
Right. And that brings us back to Crawford's call for bold diplomacy.
What does that even look like? Does that mean direct U.S. involvement in negotiations? Does that mean pressuring Zelensky to make concessions? What does that mean?
These are the million-dollar questions.
Yeah, and the answers are far from clear, but what is clear is that the stakes are very, very high.
The future of Ukraine, the stability of the region.
Global stage.
The U.S. role in the world. It's all hanging in the balance.
And as we've seen, the winds are shifting, both domestically and internationally.
And that could have huge consequences for the conflict and how it's ultimately resolved.
One of the things that's really striking to me about this whole situation is how much it really highlights how domestic politics and foreign policy are totally interconnected. What happens in Washington has ripple effects around the world.
Yeah, like the war in Ukraine is a perfect example of that.
Exactly.
It's not just what happens on the battlefield. It's political calculations, economic interests, even public opinion.
All of it.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for our listeners to understand that these shifts and these debates about U.S. support for Ukraine aren't just abstract concepts. They have real consequences.
For the Ukrainian people.
Yeah.
And for the future of U.S. leadership globally.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, why should the average American even care about all of this?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think there are a few reasons.
Okay.
One, the U.S. has a long history of involvement in international conflicts.
Right.
And the way we choose to engage impacts the whole world. Our decisions impact global stability and trade.
And even the cost of goods here at home.
Yeah, it's not realistic to think that we can isolate ourselves from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Two, this war has really highlighted how fragile peace is and how important our international alliances are.
Yeah.
What happens in one part of the world can quickly impact us all.
Right. We can't just ignore these things because they seem far away.
Exactly.
It all has the potential to impact every single one of us.
And finally, I think this debate over Ukraine really touches on some fundamental questions about our values.
Yeah.
As a nation, what role do we want to play? How much are we willing to sacrifice?
Yeah, to support democracy.
To support our allies.
Yeah.
These are questions that every American should be thinking about.
Yeah, it's not just about politics. It's about our place in the world.
Right.
And the kind of future we want to build.
Exactly. And this landscape is changing all the time.
Constantly. Yeah.
Which means we have to be informed and engaged if we want to deal with these complex challenges.
Yeah, we can't just sit back.
Right.
We need to be a part of the conversation.
That's why these deep dives are so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. They help us understand these complex issues.
And make our voices heard. Yeah.
So I think it's safe to say we've given everyone a lot to think about today.
Okay. So I've talked a lot about how things are shifting here in the U.S. with, more and more skepticism about giving Ukraine aid.
Especially among Republicans.
Yeah, especially among Republicans. But what does all of this actually mean for, U.S. policy moving forward? What's going to happen?
That's the million-dollar question. And to really understand that, we have to look beyond the headlines and the sound bites and think about the real mechanisms of power.
Yeah.
The influence of certain people.
Right.
And how these shifts are really going to play out.
It's not just about, whether Ukraine gets more weapons or funding. It's how all of this could actually reshape how the war unfolds.
Exactly. And not necessarily in a way that's good for Ukraine.
Right. And, we talked about those committees before.
Foreign affairs.
Yeah. Foreign affairs, intelligence, armed services.
They have a huge impact.
Huge.
On budgets, investigations, the entire direction of U.S. foreign policy.
Right. So a less unified Republican Party on Ukraine
could lead to some serious roadblocks for aid in the future.
Even if Biden wants to keep supporting them.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even if the president has the best intentions,
right,
Congress is the one who controls the money.
Exactly.
And with this new political landscape, getting that money is going to be way more difficult.
It's not just about money either.
Right.
Think about the implications for diplomacy.
Yeah, Crawford's call for bold diplomacy is interesting, but also very vague.
What does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Is he saying the U.S. should be directly involved in negotiations?
Right. Should we be pressuring Zelensky to give up more?
We really need to be asking those questions.
Because U.S. involvement, especially now,
right,
could completely change how Russia and Ukraine interact with each other.
Exactly. So this isn't just some, theoretical foreign policy debate. Yeah. This is about real people's lives.
Yeah.
This is about the course of the war.
Yeah. And we can't forget about Trump either.
Oh, he's a big factor here.
Yeah. I mean, even though he's not in office, he still has a huge influence on the Republican Party.
He wants the war to end as soon as possible.
Right, no matter what.
Exactly. And if he becomes even more powerful within the party, we could see even more pushback against the U.S. helping Ukraine.
Yeah, which could force Biden's hand.
Absolutely.
It's messy, right?
It is a tangled web.
Domestic politics, foreign relations, the military, the human cost of war. It's all connected.
All of it.
Yeah. But I think the main takeaway here for everyone listening is that the decisions being made right now in Washington are going to have a huge impact.
With the Ukraine.
On Ukraine, the U.S., and really the entire world.
To pay attention.
Yeah, pay attention, because this is important stuff.
The question we should all be asking is, can the U.S. balance its own interests with its commitment to democracy and its allies?
That's the question, Rob.
There's no easy answer.
Nope.
But it's something we all need to be thinking about.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into U.S. support for Ukraine. We hope this helped clarify things a bit.
And gave you a better sense of what might be coming next.
Yeah. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.
See you then.